let me get started. I want to welcome folks to Virtual Netroots. This is oh my gosh, this is probably my 10th Netroots or something crazy like that, but I think we're all experiencing our first virtual Netroots. So appreciate y'all joining us for some of that precious screen time that we're spending far too much of in the midst of this pandemic every day. My name is Heather Holdridge. I'm the National Director for the Digital Content and Campaigns team at Planned Parenthood Votes. And we've got a great lineup today to talk about a hashtag. I should say that well because I'm a digital person. Abortion is essential. Tell a friend now. And so really what we're gonna spend time talking about today is some of the attacks that we've seen. I think we've kind of seen this across the board, not just over the last 4 years, but particularly since this pandemic has started. We've seen targeted attacks on access to abortion care, safe and legal abortion, even in the midst of this national crisis that we're all experiencing in this moment. And so as we've talked to folks and as states have moved to do lockdowns in the face of this pandemic, we had governors in several states moving to cut off access through executive orders and other shenanigans that were happening. And we as organizers had to figure out how we were going to navigate that space. We had tools that are normally in our toolbox. We would show up in the streets. We would be organizing people in public spaces where people normally show up. And those tactics were no longer available to us in those moments. And so the purpose of this panel is for our distinguished folks to kind of share with us what's been happening, what were the attacks that we were seeing on access to sexual and reproductive health care this spring as this pandemic really took hold in the United States, and how we have adapted our organizing strategies in those moments. And of course, we are now 81 days away from the 2020 election. So how did we respond to those attacks in that moment? And how are we going to utilize what we have learned from the organizing work we did this spring in the course of the next 81 days so that we can win the election and have a serious change in leadership up and down our respective ballots, and we can all continue to fight for the world we want. So I am going to just introduce our panelists very briefly. And then we will start off by, and we have a small enough group here that I think we can kind of just take temperature of folks and maybe just drop responses in chats. But I will start with Jenny Lawson, who is the Executive Director of Planned Parenthood Votes. We have Jared DeLoof, who is the state's director for Next Gen America. We have Jacinda Padilla, who is a virtual volunteer for the Planned Parenthood Action Fund and Planned Parenthood Votes. They are a storyteller, and they're going to be sharing their story with us today. And then we have Amanda Matos, who is our constituency campaigns director at Planned Parenthood Votes. So super excited to get some wisdom from them today. But the first thing I want to do before we get into each of our panelists sharing some of their knowledge with us is, not only how are you doing, but we're all doing different work in different spaces. And so just trying to get a sense of how has your work been impacted by today's global impact. And so I will sort of drop a couple of options here, which is that your work has remained the same, hasn't really changed. That would be surprising, to be honest, if we get a lot of folks who respond in that way. That your work has remained the same and you're not sure what to do next. So maybe you haven't made changes to the work that you're doing, but you feel like maybe that's something you need to do and you're not sure how to go about that. If so, you're going to be in the right place here. Your work has shifted and you're not sure what to do next, or your work has shifted and you've got your eyes on the prize, you're ready to go forward, and you're what you're doing today, tomorrow, and for the next 81 days. So if folks just want to drop into the chat kind of how you're feeling, and as we sit here on August 14th, would love to just get a feel for our attendees here. And I'm going to drop this in the into the chat so people can see the question that we dropped in there. Let's see, what do we got here in the chat?
I responded. I probably don't count.
You always count, Jenny Lawson. Work shifted. Oh, yeah, I should have added one for those of us who are caregivers of any kind, whether that be small, young humans, older humans, or pets, because that I have to say, as both a parent of a child and a dog, both have impacted my day-to-day life in a way that I had not anticipated. Anyone else?
The other Jenny Lawson, I think that's Tati.
Oh, there's too many Jenny. I mean, there's only one Jenny Lawson, really, but maybe for the purposes of this. What's so interesting, so maybe I'll just kick it to the panel to just sort of like share some reflections on that question. You know, Jenny, you sort of dropped in the channel that your work has shifted and you're clear, but you also have kids, you know, those darn kids getting in the way. Jacinda, maybe you can speak a little bit to, you know, where you are as we, you know, as we come together today in terms of adapting to this global pandemic and really being forced to be apart from one another physically in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had been organizing for Planned Parenthood for 2 years, and already I was pushing for a digital shift. As a lot of us as organizers, we've known that digital tactics such as text thinking have been coming to the front because they are proving to be the most successful. So I am really actually just utilizing the skills that I have been preparing to launch. And so it hasn't changed too much, but it has allowed me to further develop those skills and make them even stronger than they were before.
Great, thank you so much. And I do see we have a response from Andrea Grimes. Andrea Grimes, famous Andrea Grimes, or maybe in Twitter, just in Twitter land, but who is talking a little bit about her work being in a remote workplace. So that's part of an easy adjustment. So for some of us, we had workspaces that we all went to together every day, day after day. That was my experience prior to the pandemic. But others of us already were working remotely. But educating the public, providers, and media on how COVID affects abortion access, especially self-managed abortion and repro justice more broadly. Wow. Well, thank you for the work that you do, Andrea. That's an interesting, it's interesting. Hopefully we'll have some good tactics and tips here because it's not just that we as folks who go to work every day, whether or not we were going to a physical workspace or whether we were remote, but also the folks who we're trying to reach. And so that presents interesting challenges, especially in the digital space from my perspective, because when you take away some of those other face-to-face tactics, people get a little worn out on all of that time that they spend staring at screens, and whether those be our laptops or our phones. So let me look. I see one, maybe one other. Great. Oh, and getting some love there from Tati to Andrea for the work that If When How is doing. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I actually want to kick it off to the more formal part of the panel. I'll start with you, Jenny. How have we seen people's access to sexual and reproductive health care impacted in this pandemic? Can you just give us a little bit of background? You're on mute.
Yes,
There
sorry
you
about
go.
that. I feel like I should know how to do that by now. Okay, so thank you. I think the folks on this panel are going to be able to talk about how they have shifted in organizing. I'm just going to touch on briefly really what we found immediately after the global pandemic started, where we're at now, and what we anticipate in the future, which, you know, I feel like that is laughable for me to even be able to predict. But I think what I think is important for most folks, and Andrea, that your policy platform sort of lifts up some of these things. So I want to name that this is sort of from our perspective, but also there's a bunch of people working on this as well. The first thing is that abortion is essential. That's the hashtag. Reproductive health care is essential. And we all know, I think, being on the panel, that it is time-sensitive care. It is ironic that not everybody knows that. And that a global pandemic is not the time to play a political game with people's lives. No one stops needing sexual and reproductive health care in a public health crisis. People still have sex. We're not leaving our houses. They might be having sex more. They still need birth control, STI testing, treatment, and safe and legal abortion. And in a time of crisis, they may need it more. And it's time sensitive. A delay of only a few weeks can make abortion completely inaccessible. And additional barriers forcing people to drive out of state, take time off of an essential job, et cetera. These are problems. All of the medical experts agree that are in the business of providing reproductive health care, from the American College of ACOG to other medical groups, and that not only is abortion essential and a time-sensitive procedure, but many of these states already have restrictions on abortion that make it hard, if not impossible. So you add on a global pandemic, everything's worse. And people preventing from getting an abortion, that means they have few options. They travel to another state if they have the means, which is not the case for everybody. They take the risk of exposing themselves or others to coronavirus. People who want medical supervision may instead attempt to self-manage an abortion. I think that's a lot of the work that Andrea is referring to in some of the work she's been doing. And some folks will just wait until it's too late and they can't get the care they need. And this is a disaster. Not to mention it's being layered on top of the fact that, you know, many folks are bearing the brunt of the work already in this crisis, whether they're homeschooling children, taking care of sick relatives, working essential jobs that are still deemed essential, but putting you in the risk category, making, and oftentimes making the majority of healthcare workers. Attacking essential healthcare compounds the burden they already face. And it's even more true for folks who are in abusive relationships, who are now stuck at home or sheltering in place with their abuser. And as always happens, and as we have seen over the last few months, Black and Latinx communities face the harshest economic consequences. People of color will face difficult decisions about how to support their families. Our health centers have been flooded with calls from people who are unsure if their appointments are canceled. And people have been driving hundreds of miles. We have stories in California and Colorado of folks who have left places like Texas, left redder states where restrictions have caused a lot of problems to seek care. And the circumstances are tragic. Now is not the time to be making abortion more now is the time to be making abortion more accessible, not less, in this pandemic. So let me just say, I said all of that to sort of set up the fact that that's exactly what many governors did. In March and April, 9 states used the pandemic to effectively ban abortion by interpreting their state's executive order, which required the postponement of non-essential procedures as prohibiting the provision of surgical and medical abortions. So basically, you know, when everything shut down, 9 states used the pandemic to say that includes abortion, which was a blatant effort to exploit this public health crisis and advance an unconstitutional anti-abortion agenda. It's a slippery slope, and it was terrifying. It was uniquely harmful, requiring women to travel, requiring women to postpone and heighten their risk of contracting COVID-19. So we filed 9 court cases with a bunch of partners. This was in Arkansas, Alabama, Iowa, Louisiana, Ohio, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, and West Virginia. We were involved in 5 of those cases with other organizations as well. And as April turned to May, the governors in almost all these states lifted the executive orders they had used to ban abortion and replaced them with different rules. And as a result of these changes, none of the 9 pandemic-era abortion bans that were challenged in court are in effect. But there were folks who lost care during that time, and it was a disaster. And here's the irony. The irony is, maybe not irony, I don't know if you decide if it's ironic. The reason they lifted the executive orders and the reason they changed was because they were trying to open up their states. So I think a lot of these Republican governors, frankly, were stuck between trying to open things up and ban abortion. And in some ways, they can't do both at the same time. So what's to come in the future, I think largely depends on how they think about opening up states and how they think about medical care in those contexts. But we got what we needed out of the judicial system at the moment. And the fact is that COVID and the way that governors were ruling sort of got ahead of what potentially could be really drawn out court cases and really terrible precedent. So here's the thing. This is why we're fighting. I give that example. There are countless other examples of how COVID is impacting our healthcare, how COVID is impacting our organizing. We're going to talk about this. But at the end of the day, these governors were able to do this because they held the power and they are against abortion and want to ban it. And they seized the opportunity that was presented in front of them to do just that. And it is essential that through Planned Parenthood votes and other electoral super PACs who are able to do this work, that we fight to take back that control. This is why we're launching the biggest electoral program we ever have. We know other partners are trying to do that in the space too. We're partnering with them and working to get out every last vote, because we know that for people to have full freedom and control of their lives, access to healthcare, including abortion, no matter who you are, where you live, how much money you make, is essential. And we need allies in positions of power. Notice I said allies and not necessarily champions. We need allies in positions of power that we can push, hold accountable, and demand that they protect access and undo the horrible actions of our current administration, who has shown a complete unwillingness to do that. And these governors are prime examples of what we're fighting every day in states as well. That's what we're doing. We're in about 10 to 11 states. We've got full-fledged programs. I will say in the before times, we were one of the top Canvas programs. We knocked on just as many doors as many large organizations in the environmental community and in labor and other places. We have spent a lot of time in the last 2 months figuring out how you replace that very important activity of engaging with a person in a very human, relational way in person with something else, because we are unable to do that in the pandemic. We are not replacing that budget and that resource and that energy with paid media. We're not putting more ads up. We're not sending out more mail. We are working to get organizers to engage with people digitally, to engage with people on the phones, to engage with people text, because that engagement is what mobilizes people. And that is what we've been working to build. In addition, we are doing digital ads and we are doing mail. We're not dropping it, but we're not increasing it. And so I think that's important. And I think that's what the folks on this panel are about to share with you, about the ways we've had to build the plane while we fly it a little bit, and take advice from folks who have been preaching forever, like Jacinda. So, I think we're catching up, Jacinda. I swear we're catching up. But, you have a lot of leading to do to show us the way. So with that, I'll hand it back to Heather.
Great, thank you, Jenny. And I really appreciate the last point, is the person who actually oversees the paid advertising program, which is more about messaging, mobilizing supporters. But I think it's so important to understand the distinction between that kind of outreach that we're doing to mobilize voters, to persuade voters to turn the vote out, and the kind of organizing work that we're doing. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Jared DeLuve, who I'm going to repeat kind of what people do because I know we've had a few folks join us. So Jared is the State's Director for Next Gen America, and he used to work for Governor Wolf from Pennsylvania, who has done incredible work as he came in as governor he has been a true champion of reproductive health care in his time in office and also with OFA. So Jared, I want to ask you a question about how NextGen's work has been impacted and how you've pivoted. Obviously, you are a multi-issue organization that kind of is just trying to reach young folks in your work. So please share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Heather. So a little bit of everything has changed, while also a lot of like the fundamentals remaining the same. I like to joke, of course, we would have the most important election in any of our lifetimes, and it would also be the most complicated, right? Like nothing is ever easy. For folks who aren't familiar with NextGen, just a quick overview, we are a political action committee, the largest political action committee dedicated solely to the registration, education, and mobilization of 18 to 35-year-olds across the country, right? We know that young people are the most progressive, most pro-choice, most pro-LGBT, pro-climate, pro-racial equality generation in American history. And when they start to vote at the rates that their parents and grandparents do, that change will be reflected in government. Right. And so that is our theory of change. That's what we work every day to do, is make sure that these young people are able to have their voice heard at the ballot box and throughout the year. One of the things that people are often surprised to learn about NextGen is, well, first, about 90% of our actual organizing is on college campuses, which isn't the surprising part. The surprising part is that like most of our organizing was actually pretty low tech. We are still a pen and clipboard voter registration operation, and kind of proud of that. Not that our other digital techniques aren't sophisticated, but you know, the old tried and true out in the field. And I remember in February, we started to have the conversation of, hey, this COVID thing is really a thing. We should start to have a conversation about how this is going to impact things. And by the end of that week, most of the college campuses were gone. And we all of a sudden, all of our people that we organized were all of a sudden scattered throughout the country, and we had to learn really quick how to do this. So a few things on kind of how we've shifted. The first is that we are much more prioritizing and increasing sort of our digital and our mail outreach. I mean, the fact of the matter is that young people face a ton of barriers to voter registration in particular, and we have to contact them. And one of the ways that we're finding that really is still working for us is mail, which is something not all progressive groups, you know, target young people with mail. And I'm here to preach the gospel that it works and that folks should engage young people through mail. The other thing is that we've really shifted more heavily into kind of a texting and calling program more than we've done in the past. We recently just had a day of action for National Vote by Mail Day, where the goal was to educate young voters and actually help facilitate them requesting their vote by mail ballot, and creating this space within the progressive movement for this to be a big moment. You may have seen tweets from some well-known folks like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama about this. But in this one day, we texted 3.6 million 18 to 35-year-olds in our 11 battleground states about vote by mail, with an actual link in most states of where they could write on their phone, go and request their vote by mail. So in the past, while that might have been a big day of door knocking and recruiting a bunch of volunteers and staging locations, we're actually able to have almost the same size impact, if not greater, through some of these other avenues that are maybe a little less traditional. I'll also say that like our campus organizing work, as we're moving into the fall, where a campus organizer or volunteers used to stand in the cafeteria or outside of, you know, the local pizza place and engage people in a conversation about voter registration, we're still in those spaces, but we're in the online spaces, right? So like the Facebook group for, you know, the freshman class, or whether it be the anime club, or whether it be the Greek life, we are still in all of those spaces. It's just not physically, it's digitally now. to kind of help facilitate that, what we've really been investing in ever since we kind of moved off of campus is we have been recruiting trusted messengers to young people that we can activate, right? So these are professors, these are fellow students, this is the RA in the dorm, and really recruiting these people and having, you know, one-on-one conversations about, hey, you know, this is the most important election ever, it's complicated, you know, will you share out some of these resources, some of these links? Will you make sure that everyone on your dorm floor is registered to vote, right? And so it's actually forced us to expand our network in a way that has been really, really helpful to us, and I think is really proving, you know, to deliver. Just two last things. So we also have an influencer program. We know that young people are on Instagram all the time. It's not necessarily the big Instagram followers, you know, that have 1 million followers. It's the person on the college campus that has 1,500. Right? Well, they post something about, hey, just requested my vote by mail ballot. It was super simple. Here's where you can do it. And we've been recruiting those people. We've just, I think, hit over 1,000 macro influencers and over thousands of more micro influencers who will do that sort of posting. But I will say, like, the challenges are still definitely there. And I'll just end on, like, for us, GOTV starts right now. It started a few weeks ago. And GOTV this year equals education. The election laws are changing faster than we can keep up with them. That is especially confusing for young people who are totally new to this process in a lot of ways anyways. And so every conversation we have with young people, where are you registered? What makes sense for you to be registered? And the honest answer is that there's not one good, one fits all answer to that. And we really have to have personal conversations with folks about what's going to be the best way for them to cast a ballot safely and effectively this year.
Great. Thanks so much, Jared. A lot of great meaty stuff in there. I want to jump to Jacinda. And a little bit more background on Jacinda. They are an organizer in Portland working on a mayoral campaign right now. And so doing frontline work in local elections. And they're also a storyteller and speaker for Planned Parenthood. So we're thrilled to have them with us. So Jacinda, my question for you, as an organizer, storyteller, volunteer, everything I sort of set up here, you know, you're doing this during a pandemic. A little bit of change there. Can you share how the pandemic has personally affected you and your experience at Planned Parenthood as a patient? You're muted.
Yep, I just realized that. Thank you so much, Heather. And just thank you to everybody at Netroots for having me here today. I'm really excited about it. But the pandemic, before the pandemic happened, we needed to make sure that we aren't losing steam. And then the pandemic hit, and I feel like it woke a lot of folks up. I've been at Planned Parenthood for 2 years as an advocate and an organizer, and now I'm a national speaker for them. And all of my organizing training has come directly from Planned Parenthood Advocates of Oregon, which is my local affiliate here. And their fellowship program has trained us to lobby and participate in elections and navigate our unique Oregonian political system. But as a patient before, my experience with Planned Parenthood goes back so much further. I was the friend who brought contraception to every party. I was the most stoked about sexual education. And so I was really disappointed in myself when at 16, I had to have an abortion and I didn't tell anybody. I was the perfect student and it really did make me feel like a failure. And while I didn't have an abortion at Planned Parenthood in California, my family moved to St. Louis shortly after, where abortion clinics across the state are constantly under attack. And one of the only clinics that are still able to operate and run are Planned Parenthood clinics. And so living in that red state, it was important for me to find empowering reproductive healthcare, and even harder because I was still uninsured, as I was for 20 years of my life. Planned Parenthood provided me with all of the resources I needed while being uninsured, thanks to Title X. And still today, I know we are working to ensure that we can keep funding those low-income communities and ensuring that everybody's getting access to care. But I told Planned Parenthood, they were the first people that I told that I had an abortion, before my mom, before my friends, before my family. And I felt so empowered when they gave me birth control options, and when they told me that I didn't need to feel ashamed, but that I was in a community of support. And I am no longer ashamed of my abortion because of Planned Parenthood and because of the care I received. And that's why I'm here today. I am not afraid to share that with y'all. But COVID-19 has made it difficult to receive care. I am very avid on sticking with birth control that works for me, not only just physically, but mentally. So my telemed health visits with Planned Parenthood Oregon has been really awesome, because sometimes, you know, birth control can make you feel depressed, or it can make you gain weight. And during a quarantine, you're not sure, you know, am I gaining weight because I'm sitting on the couch, or is my body being affected negatively by my birth control? And Planned Parenthood Columbia Willamette has health centers across the country, and Planned Parenthood has health centers across the country in the nation that are serving low-income Black and Brown patients. They're helping not only me receive access to care, but everybody across the nation to feel protected and empowered. And Planned Parenthood actually is now offering at some locations COVID-19 testing. I am currently unemployed, and I am thankfully insured by the Oregon Health Plan, which allows me to receive free care, not only at my local Planned Parenthood, but everywhere at no cost. But I can now get a COVID test with my pals at Planned Parenthood. Next week, I'm going to go in and go get a second COVID test so I can ensure that everybody I'm organizing around is safe. So I believe, as professionally, I'm an organizer who believes it's imperative that abortion and all sexual and reproductive health services are acceptable to everybody who needs it. And that also includes COVID-19 testing. Reproductive justice includes climate justice, racial justice, and ensuring that everybody has access to all health services. Regardless of being in a pandemic, we need to ensure that we all deserve and are getting excellent care all the time.
Thank you so much, Jacinda. And the one thing the very last thing that you said, I think one thing that's also really manifested in this pandemic is the intersectionality of everything, and the ways in which every aspect of our lives is impacted by it, which is why we have to think holistically about how we approach the solutions to what's going on right now. So I'm gonna kick it over, and actually, you know, before I do kick it over to Amanda, I want to thank you for your story, Jacinda, and maybe folks can show some love, favorite emoji maybe in the chat. It's not always easy to share these stories, so thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you so much. It's because of y'all that I can share these stories.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you so much for saying that. Amanda, I'm going to kick it to you, our constituency campaigns director with Planned Parenthood Votes. What does it look like on the ground and in our communities to pivot these programs in this moment? We've heard Jared talk a little bit about that. How have you shifted campus-based to virtual spaces?
Thanks, Heather, and thanks again, Jacinda, for sharing your story. So much of it resonated. Even I'm thinking the times I've used Planned Parenthood Direct, so it's another plug for a telehealth piece that you can receive TI medication just through an app. It's affordable. It's very easy. As a millennial, if I can do it on an app, I'm just very, very happy. So just thank you for uplifting your own story and the connection to the work. For me, when I think about the pivot when COVID hit, honestly, there was no surprise in terms of what happens to our constituency organizing work. I'll explain what I mean, why I was not surprised in just a second. So when it's not election time, Planned Parenthood Federation and our Action Fund, we work with our states across the country to build out really robust constituency organizing programs. We have Planned Parenthood Generation Action, which is our campus organizing program that reaches over 300 college campuses, including over 30 at historically Black colleges and universities. We also have a Black and Latinx organizing program that's in almost half the country. So we're reaching nearly 20 states that we've been working with in our deep Black and Latinx work. These programs are key because we exist beyond elections. Our communities as Black, Indigenous, people of color, young folks, millennials, and Gen Z, again, the issues impacting us exist before, after, and during elections. And this is what makes our work at Planned Parenthood Votes so successful, is that the issues impacting our communities exist all the time. And for that very reason, when COVID hit, thinking about how do we pivot our work, honestly, instead, it just came as no surprise, because that meant that the systemic issues of racism and sexism that are directly impacting our communities were more visible than ever. And instead, it was an opportunity to take the deficit and how our communities are talked about and show our strength in our organizing. Young people, Gen Z especially, understands intersectionality in a way that even millennials still don't understand. And I am a diehard millennial, and I have areas to grow. So some of the examples that really showcase how we were able to handle the pandemic also address how we're understanding current police violence against Black and Indigenous communities that have existed for centuries. We're also going to talk about how just public health and racism are tied hand in hand together, and how all of that is wrapped up in what our electoral work is. So for all you folks on this call who are all about the intersections and showing how the C3, C4, and electoral work come together, like, you are in the perfect space, so I'm glad you're here. So just to give an example, honestly, is that we work with our college chapters. Many, again, as I mentioned, are minority serving institutions and on HBCU campuses. We work with them year round on local campaigns, and that's what makes our constituency work so successful. So of course, we're training up our folks like Jacinda on lobbying and on voter reg, but we're also training up our folks to organize around a local issue that directly matters to them. In the pre-COVID world, our Hampton University students at this HBCU campus were already targeting their administration to make sure that they can create a free distribution center that would include 24 hours a day access to free menstrual products, emergency contraception, and barrier methods. That was something that they were gearing towards, did their power mapping, were raising funds, working with their local Planned Parenthood affiliate to be able to make this happen. When COVID hit, it was an excuse for the administration to say, no, we can't do this. We're moving to remote learning. We can't allocate our funds right now to provide these free services. So instead, what the Hampton students did, they made a peer-to-peer delivery service. They were already on campus. Many of them still hadn't moved home yet. And they were able to make sure that they had access to all the products that they needed, and were able to set up a texting line, a free hotline, where people can just text what methods they needed, whether it was a menstrual product, a barrier method, emergency contraception, and the volunteer base of Gen Action students delivered these products to the young folks. When folks started moving away from campus, they were able to raise enough funds to then deliver these directly to the young people's homes. Noting that no matter if you're in a red state, blue state, purple state, sometimes when you're just a college student, accessing the essential services is still a barrier, even when we are trying to make them affordable in our health centers. And so through Generation Action, we're meeting our young folks where they're at and making sure that they see those direct connections of the role of mutual aid in a power building method. So another example also of how our students showed up and showed out was just understanding the intersections in this current moment. I can't isolate COVID from police violence in my own mind, or the public healthcare disparities that are impacting communities of color. So our students at Arizona State University, in the moment where George Floyd was murdered, Breonna Taylor, among many others, they decided to leverage their own Instagram handle, because they were already organizing on Instagram before COVID, and create bingo cards to actually fundraise to a local bail fund. This was just incredible because, again, young folks, we understand intersectionality in a way that is making other generations, my own generation, look bad. So we were able to connect the dots so seamlessly from what was happening with COVID and the pandemic, who essential workers are, what essential healthcare actually is, and the role that violence has on our own public health and livelihood. All of our constituency programs, whether it's through Gen Action, our Black or Latinx organizing program, we look at the model of mutual aid, whether it's mutual aid through a local abortion fund, a bail fund, even COVID relief for the community, passing hand sanitizers, masks, food deliveries. We see this as that first step to engage our own communities with their own basic essential needs before ever talking about a candidate, before ever talking about voter registration or the larger structures of the Supreme Court. We need to make sure that we are connecting deep in organizing to solve the problems that are impacting people's day-to-day lives. And that in and of itself is power building. So now at this point, we're able to pivot our work to Planned Parenthood Votes with our constituency programs, centering Gen Z and millennials, centering our Black and Latinx communities across our target states, because we have this infrastructure already built in where we have clear examples of how we build power in our communities. So to preview and wrap up what our pivot looks like now of how do you do electoral work in a time of COVID, you know, we're centering our people, making sure relationship building is key, especially relational organizing. Talking to your own loved ones about the issues that you care about is always the tried and true tradition of what works. We're thinking about how are we going to effectively support our young folks in vote by mail and voter registration right now, knowing that universities aren't giving them the most accurate information on where they can learn about the election, their rights, or just even access to healthcare. And we're hoping to do this through a big launch in September of our youth voter guide that will actually showcase cross-movement issues, because we know reproductive rights is only one area that's impacting our young folks. So through our youth work, through our Black and Latinx organizing work, we're building power and using our non-electoral tactics in an electoral lens, because once we have that trust in our own communities, then we're able to talk about that governor, then we're able to talk about that senator, then we're able to talk about what's actually going to happen come November 3rd. And that's why I'm excited again that Planned Parenthood exists inside and outside, before and after elections, because we're able to build long-term power together.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing that. I have been told by our Netroots host, our wonderful Netroots host, that we have a couple of extra minutes to work with, since we started a little bit late here and had a little bit of technical difficulty. So we're happy to go another 5 minutes or so. I want to, I dropped it in the chat, but I also want to give folks, just say it out loud, that if you have questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat. So really interested in people's feedback, what you're hearing, follow-up questions you might have for any of the panelists based on what they've shared today. Please go ahead and do so. I think we can definitely get at least one question answered, or take at least one comment and kind of chew on that and respond to how you're thinking about this. But in the meantime, I want to go back to you, Jared, real quick. You know, Next Gen America, of course, is an organization with a strong canvas and field presence. What shifts, some of the shifts that you've made at Next Gen around that?
Definitely. So one of the things I'm actually really proud of is I think Next Gen was one of the first groups that actually pulled our folks from the field when it became clear that this was not a good situation for people, and you know, that was a big decision to make, and we pulled folks out. I mean, again, I think we have really invested in kind of these digital sorts of spaces. One of the biggest challenges with that is how do you kind of facilitate a volunteer sort of experience among that, right? Mm-hmm. It's one thing to move your staff into something. It's another thing to facilitate a sort of moving from a field volunteer experience into an online sort of space. Yeah. And so some of our learnings around that's actually enabled us to continue doing the work that we've done and to be really effective is that whatever sort of online space you move people into needs to be like authentic, and it needs to mimic the other online spaces in which people are already spending time, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things that we have found is whether that be a Facebook group, whether that be reaching out to people on Instagram, you have to, there's certain tools that we're using. For example, Slack, we're trying to move most of our organizing onto sort of Slack spaces. Well, that only works if it's a space that people want to log into each morning, right? And see what's going on. And so we've kind of asked ourselves the question, why does someone go on Instagram, right? Like, why does someone get on Facebook? And it can be everything from the funny memes that are on there to sharing news to like the feeling of community and knowing what's going on with your friends. And so if we're going to expect people to engage in those sorts of spaces, even if it isn't one that they're familiar with, it needs to look a lot like the ones that they're familiar with, right? So we try to make sure that it's a space where people are free to post a lot of their their own content and to make creative memes that then can kind of get distributed all throughout our volunteer network, and that people can really feel like they own that space. And then the last thing I'll say is that even though we're online, the one-on-one relationship is just still the most. I mean, there's nothing better than that, and making sure that our volunteers, our organizers, even though it's an online space, that we're still taking time to jump on a Zoom call, have a cup of coffee, hear what's going on in that person's lives and what they want to do to have an impact in the election.
Thank you. Jacinda, I actually want to follow up with you, because we have, you know, all of these people who work for movement organizations, but you're kind of on the other side of interactions. So I'm curious for you to sort of share how this experience has been for you, and how is digital organizing an effective tactic in the moment that we're in?
Yeah, totally. So I'm not affiliated with like a huge organization like everybody here, but I am doing a different type of really radical campaign down here in Portland. It's actually a write-in campaign, and it's going wild, and our digital tactics are like making it actual success. I would have never thought that a write-in campaign would be viable ever, but these digital tactics that we've been learning are pushing us so far forward. So as a national speaker of Planned Parenthood, we'd already been organizing with digital tactics, like I spoke about before, because we're all based across the nation. But like I always say, accessibility is a pillar of grassroots organizing. Online advocacy has been proven to be a successful means of achieving that goal. The National Storytellers of Planned Parenthood, or NSPP, as some of you may know, they've taught me to host really effective educational calls and gotten me involved with completing monthly actions to advocate for those issues that we all care about. Somebody mentioned Outvote before. So we've been using Outvote for not only our own campaigns, for other campaigns as well, but it's really bolstering our relational organizing. We use text banking, online calls, orientations. I just hosted my own volunteer call with 6 friends who showed up and, you know, hung out with me and are now volunteering with Planned Parenthood. I personally have used a lot of Instagram, as Jared was talking about before. Our influencers, not only for our write-in campaign, but for Planned Parenthood Oregon and so much more, has been extremely effective. We've even gotten Damian Lillard from the Portland Blazers to endorse our campaign, and he's posting about us. So it's wild. It's really rad. So one thing that I want to completely push is the 1 to 5 rule. So whenever you're texting your friends or your family, ask every single one of those person to tell 5 more people. I really stress this because those 5 people telling another 5 people each, you just told another 25 extra people. And I know how hard it can be to relational organize with your family and your friends, especially as us really passionate organizers. We're probably texting them about abortion and reproductive rights every day because this work doesn't stop ever. But I do follow up with everybody. I don't care if they think I'm annoying, because this is important. And I also don't see it as annoying. I see it as persistent because I'm not going to let anybody not have access to care, including my friends and family. So I do follow up with them just like we would with text banking or phone banking. I'm like, did you text your 5 people? And then I'll even follow up a second time if I'm sending another petition. But with our Portland, Oregon, we have been going through a lot, as you may know, and I've seen online. I have been at the front lines working in tear gas several times. And so I've been working with an organization, Don't Shoot PDX, which actually put out one of the very first published research about one of the very first ones on how tear gas affects reproductive systems in healthcare. It messes up your menstrual cycles. It can sterilize you and make you infertile. And it's not just for AFAB bodies, it's also for AMAB bodies as well. And so we're able to push these push this information out there with our text banking by calling our members of Congress, state and nationally. And we're ensuring that they know how horrible these tactics are for the people on the ground, and how we can do that by advocating through our vote by mail, which we have in Oregon. And I do agree with you, Jared. I'm a Gen Z, the oldest Gen Z, but I love getting mail. It is one of my favorite activities to get. So I just want to stress that using these digital activities and organizing creates a more accessible way for everybody. I have 200 volunteers that I'm organizing, and I had 45 people show up to a canvassing event the other day.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, keep doing it, and yeah, it's really great.
So I want to thank all of our panelists. We're literally going to get the hook in 1 minute. The digital version of the hook is they cut off the Zoom. So I want to thank all of us who were able to join. I want to thank our panelists, Jacinda, Amanda, Jenny Lawson, and Jared, for all of your amazing wisdom. 3 quick takeaways. GOTV is education, so do it now, and that starts today. Shifting to digital means finding ways to do direct voter contact through that platform, not just the broadcast work that we're all accustomed to. And I'm going to close with Jacinda's 1 to 5 rule. For every contact you're making, make sure you're reaching out to 5. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful next Netroots. And the last thing I'll say is, if you want to get involved in the Planned Parenthood Votes program, text ORGANIZE to 22422, and we'll start hooking you up with some of our volunteer opportunities. Have a great Friday, everybody. Thank you.